Welcome to Her Story, the podcast that brings to life the stories of incredible women throughout history. Each episode uncovers the remarkable lives, achievements, and struggles of women who shaped the world, beyond the textbooks and headlines. Join us as we celebrate their legacies and inspire new generations with tales of courage, resilience, and trailblazing spirit. In today's episode, I'll be talking to Professor Tracy Borman about her new upcoming book, A Stolen Crown. Tracy Borman is a best-selling author, historian, and broadcaster. Her books include Thomas Cromwell, The Private Lives of the Tudors, Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I, and most recently, The Stolen Crown. Tracy is a chief historian of historic royal palaces, Chief Executive of the Heritage Education Trust. She is Chancellor and Professor of Tudor History at Lincoln Bishop University. Tracy has presented numerous history documentaries for Channel 5, including Inside the Tower of London and The Fall of Anne Boleyn. She is a regular contributor to BBC History magazine and gives talks on her books across the country and abroad. Tracy was awarded an OBE for services to heritage in the King's Birthday Honours in 2024. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to the podcast, Tracy. How are you?
Oh, thanks, Jess. I'm very well. Thank you for having me back. I'm very excited to talk to you about something new and something Tudor.
And of course, it's about Elizabeth I and her legacy and her death.
That's right. My new book is called The Stolen Crown, and it's Treachery, Deceit, and the Death of the Tudor Dynasty. So what it looks at is this new evidence discovered by the British Library that suggests very strongly that Elizabeth didn't actually name her successor at all. It was often thought that on her deathbed, she named James of Scotland as her heir. But in fact, there is good reason to doubt that. And so that's hence the name of the book, The Stolen Crown, because technically I think it was actually stolen by James of Scotland. But it's been wonderful. I've loved delving back into the world of Elizabeth. And the book kind of covers her whole reign, really, because the succession issue was there throughout. From the moment she became queen and declared that she wasn't going to get married, of course, it was the hottest topic of the day. Who is this woman going to marry? How are we going to have an heir if she's not going to take a husband? So it was pretty much the only thing anybody could talk about throughout Elizabeth's long reign.
No, absolutely. I think that is the hottest question in Elizabethan eras. Who is she going to name as her heir?
Exactly. And there were some kind of favoured contenders. Mary, Queen of Scots, was probably head of the list for most of Elizabeth's reign because she was closest in blood to Elizabeth. But there was a problem with the Scottish claim, and that's that Henry VIII had actually barred the Stuarts from ever inheriting the throne of England. And he'd made that very, very clear. And he'd made it illegal. So technically the Stuarts couldn't inherit. And also, I think it's easy for us to underestimate just how much English people saw Scottish people as foreigners. Like England and Scotland, they might have been united by geography, but they weren't in any other way. They saw each other as fierce opponents, as foreign countries. And so that was quite a bar as well to Mary, Queen of Scots' claim.
Could you tell us about the newly discovered evidence that you mentioned that inspired this book?
Yes, so this was a research project by Helena Rutowski, and she is working with the University of Oxford and also with the British Library on William Camden's Annals of the Reign of Elizabeth I. So William Camden was Elizabeth's earliest biographer. He was writing during her lifetime. But he didn't finish the book. He didn't actually want to write the book to begin with. It was Lord Burleigh, Elizabeth's cherished, trusted minister, who commissioned him, because I think when Burleigh was getting towards the end of his life, he wanted a kind of record of how wonderful Elizabeth had been. So he gave Camden access to all sorts of privileged material in compiling his account of her reign. But then Elizabeth died, Burleigh died before that, and Camden kind of quietly put the unfinished book to bed and hoped never to see it again. But then James came to the throne, and within a very short space of time, there was opposition to James, most notably with the gunpowder plot, because James, I think we can call it a clash of cultures. When he became King of England, he had a very different style of monarchy to the Tudors, and the people of England didn't like it. So he was kind of clinging onto the English throne by his fingertips within just a few years. And he needed almost Elizabeth from beyond the grave to say, yes, I did want James as my successor. And so that's why he told Camden to start his history of Elizabeth again, or rather to continue it. And in particular, to write all the way up to the end of the reign and to tell the story of how Elizabeth left her throne to him. In other words, to make it up. Because in Camden's first draft, before James was king, he makes no mention of Elizabeth naming an heir. And then it's only when James puts him under pressure to go and rewrite it that suddenly there's this new passage appears. And we know this because the British Library used advanced imaging technique, like the transmitted light, to actually show the original words of Camden's manuscript, which were then pasted over and crossed through. And it's really quite startling. It's quite a big discovery that this whole Tudor-Stuart succession that we thought was a done deal actually was very far from being the case. And Elizabeth, as Camden said in his first version, she simply died without naming anybody, whether that was James or anybody else. So that was what inspired my book.
I mean, that's quite groundbreaking, isn't it? Obviously, Elizabeth never really wanted to name an heir while she was queen, so it's not really surprising that at her death she still didn't want to name an heir.
No, exactly, because she didn't want any attention away from herself. Also, she didn't want to put herself in danger because she knew it was actually quite dangerous to name an heir, because immediately there'd be the focus for plots against yourself. And she had been in that position herself during the reign of her sister Mary. So she was adamant that she didn't want to name her successor. So it was always a bit odd that suddenly on her deathbed she decides and she's going to change her mind and name James. So it's really intriguing that that's now been busted, that particular myth. And we can look again at fresh eyes, which is what I do in my book, at who else might have been king or indeed queen, because there were quite a few contenders.
That leads me on to my next question. If Elizabeth didn't leave her throne to James, who are the other possible candidates, and do we know who she wanted to succeed her?
Yes, so the other possible candidates included Catherine Grey, sister of Lady Jane Grey, the Nine Days Queen, and also her sister Mary, and then Catherine's sons, because she married another blood claimant, Edward Seymour. Now, Catherine Grey had a strong claim because actually, while Henry VIII had barred his Stuart relatives, who were descended from his elder sister Margaret, he had actually favoured his relatives, his descendants from his younger sister Mary, his favourite sister. And Catherine Grey was a descendant of Henry VIII's sister Mary. So actually she had a very, very strong claim to the throne. Arbella Stuart, now again, Stuarts, there's that problem of Henry VIII not wanting them, but Arbella Stuart had been born in England, which made her more acceptable, I think, to the people who were looking for Elizabeth's potential heir. There were other players, such as Lady Margaret Stanley, again descended from Henry VIII's sister Mary. There was Henry Hastings, Earl of Huntingdon, who actually didn't have Tudor blood. He had Plantagenet blood. So he had an even better claim to the throne. And then there's even this wild card, Isabella, Infanta of Spain, who was the daughter of Philip II, and she entered the mix in the later years of Elizabeth's reign because she could claim descent from the sort of ancient royal line of England as well. And I think at the time of Elizabeth's death, there were about 12 people who could have inherited her throne. So it was by no means a foregone conclusion. But you asked me who Elizabeth really wanted to inherit. Now, even though she didn't name him, I think for her, James was, I think we would call it the best of a bad lot. She disliked him less than she disliked all the others. She didn't really like any of those with the claim to her throne. But I think she did, by actions, not words, sort of smooth the path for James's accession. You can see how she removed the obstacles, how she was over a 20-year correspondence these two had, Elizabeth and James. She's sort of feeding him bits of advice about how to be a good king of England. And she doesn't do that for any of the other claimants to her throne. So I think probably Elizabeth preferred James. But it wasn't ideal because she knew full well he was a misogynist and he thought female rulers were an insult to nature. And so, yeah, she wouldn't really wanted to leave her crown to somebody like that. But he had the strongest blood claim.
Who had the best claim to the English throne on paper?
On paper, that had to have been the sons of Catherine Grey. So they were Seymours because she'd married a Seymour. And they were Edward and Thomas. Edward was still living at the time of Elizabeth's death. And they were technically, legally, the strongest claimants to her throne, according to both Henry VIII's Acts of Succession and also to his last will and testament, both of which named the Greys as preferred heirs once Henry's children had died, which of course by Elizabeth was the last of Henry's children. So technically it would be one of the sons of Catherine Grey.
What impact did Elizabeth's decision not to marry have on the succession?
That had a huge impact. And it was the number one talking point, as I said earlier. I mean, she told her first parliament in 1559, I will live and die a virgin. And that's all very well. I personally think that was the right decision because Elizabeth knew full well how divisive it would be if she married. Because if you marry somebody from overseas, the people of England were very xenophobic, as had been proved in the reign of Elizabeth's sister Mary. If she married a homegrown candidate, equally divisive, it would prompt factions and rivalry. And as well, and this is my favourite quote of Elizabeth, she said, I will have but one mistress here and no master. She had fought hard for that throne. She didn't want to give up any power to a husband. And I think quite right too, in my opinion. But of course, the fly in the ointment with not marrying was that she would never have a direct heir. So the succession would never be straightforward. She needed a child for that to be straightforward. So this is why from the very beginning of her reign, it's almost like vultures circling. Everybody who has a claim to the throne starts to try to position themselves, either get in favour with Elizabeth or get in favour with her enemies who might help her to help them to the throne through force. And there was real fears that there would be a Spanish invasion on behalf of one of these claimants, certainly the Catholic claimants. And I suppose that's the other thing to note as well, that as with so many other things in Tudor England, the claimants to Elizabeth's throne were split down religious lines. There were kind of the Protestant candidates, and then there were the Catholic claimants. And Mary, Queen of Scots, top of the list of Catholic claimants. And then James, ironically, her son, was a Protestant. So yeah, that made the Stuarts a little bit more acceptable in the eyes of Elizabeth and her ministers.
You think if Elizabeth did decide to marry, who do you think would have been her top contender if she did marry?
I think if she'd married with the heart, then Robert Dudley, undoubtedly, of course, only once his wife had died, Amy Robsart. There's a huge if in this, though, because, I think Elizabeth loved him. They knew each other for 50 years. There was obvious intimacy between them. I don't mean a full-blown affair, but I do mean they were very, very close. And it was a relationship of love. And my favorite letter in the National Archives is the last letter that Dudley ever wrote to Elizabeth, just before he died, and she's inscribed it on the back, his last letter, and she kept it in a locked casket by her bedside for the rest of her life, which I think really speaks volumes. But Elizabeth wasn't a woman to follow her heart. As she said, really, on many occasions, Mary Queen of Scots was her great rival, and that ended in disaster. But Elizabeth ruled with the head. And so, if she'd made a kind of head decision, maybe it would have been the Duke of Anjou, who I think as well she was very, very fond of, her last suitor. But by then, she was pretty much past childbearing years. So it wouldn't really have brought her that much advantage to marry Anjou. So I think probably Robert Dudley wins out. But as I say, she didn't want to give any power up to her husband.
What effect did James's illegal succession to the English throne have on the monarchy?
Huge effect, a devastating effect, actually, because James had flagrantly ignored the advice that Elizabeth had tried to drip feed him over those 20 years. Telling him to play the king, to show yourself to your people, to work with Parliament. He ignored all of that. And he rode roughshod over the English Parliament. In Scotland, kings were almost like God figures. Their divine right to rule was taken very, very seriously. And so that gave them the right to tell Parliament what to do. But of course, that wasn't the relationship that the Tudors had with Parliament. They ruled sort of in partnership with Parliament. So that soon created deep-seated problems for James and resentment. And as well, the fact that James kind of hid himself away, he didn't really see the point in these great set pieces of the Tudor court and the progresses and the magnificence. He just liked to go hunting and spend his time with his Scottish favourites. And that really went down like a lead balloon with his English subjects. They hated that. So within a really, really short space of time, as I said, James lost friends, and even those who'd really welcomed and celebrated his arrival as king now couldn't bear the sight of him and were plotting against him. There were plots almost immediately against James. And yet I think it's ironic, and it sort of serves the people of England right, that they celebrated that at last there's going to be a man on the throne because, they've had 50 years of queens. They'd had enough of queens. Now we've got a man, and that's how it's supposed to be. Kings are the natural order of the day. But of course, James wasn't quite what they were expecting. And so they very, very quickly cooled. Now, this ultimately, I would say, resulted in civil war. This clash of cultures between the way the Stuarts did things and the Tudors, the fact that James didn't take on that advice Elizabeth had tried to give him, and neither did his son, Charles, who clearly just followed his father's model. And he took it to even greater extremes with Parliament and just dissolved Parliament whenever it disagreed with him. And that ultimately sparked civil war and the end of the monarchy. So you could say that, the lie that begun the Stuart rule really ended the monarchy. That there were some very serious repercussions from this technically illegal accession of James VI, who became James I. And even though the monarchy was ultimately restored, from that time onwards, Parliament held all the power. And so it had earth-shattering consequences, this illegal succession, this stolen crown, if you like, of James.
Did anyone in the English court when Elizabeth was alive help, message James her condition, about how she was feeling, how her health was?
So that's a really good question, because in the later years of Elizabeth's reign, James started to get a little network of supporters in the English court, and in particular Robert Cecil, Elizabeth's chief minister, whose father was Lord Burleigh, and he kind of took over from his father as chief minister. Now, I think he decided James was probably the best candidate. So James cultivated him and they set up this secret correspondence. They wrote to each other with code names, and it was all very cloak and dagger because, of course, they'd be in trouble if the Queen found out. And I think really James owed his throne to Robert Cecil and the others working with Cecil because they just smoothed it all. And you can see how, in the last days of Elizabeth, Cecil orders that, the ports be secured in case of a Spanish invasion to put somebody else on the throne, and how that he put extra guards in key English cities in case there was an uprising against James. So Robert Cecil was going to huge lengths to ensure that James was able to claim Elizabeth's throne very, very smoothly, and it did work. I love the fact he drafted the proclamation of James quite a long time before Elizabeth was dead. So, he made sure of that. And also there's this letter that survives that Robert Cecil started when Elizabeth was alive and ended when James was on the throne. And you see how he switches to the past tense when he's talking about Elizabeth. So, yeah, I think James owed Robert Cecil a very great deal indeed.
What did you enjoy the most about writing this book?
Well, number one had to be just spending time with Elizabeth again. I think, Jess, she's my all-time historical heroine. I love Elizabeth. And so it was a joy being able to go back to her reign. And also just what I really loved was, inspired by this dramatic new evidence, just taking away everything I knew in a way and starting from scratch, looking at these candidates for Elizabeth's throne as the people at the time would have looked at them. Because now, there's always a danger with history. You use hindsight and you think, okay, well, we know James came to the throne, so the others must have had no chance. But actually, they really did have a chance and they had huge support. So I tried to kind of put to one side everything that I knew and really look at each of these claimants and their merits individually and just how likely they were to take the throne. I should say as well, I've written a piece for the October issue of BBC History magazine, and I give there's a fun little bit at the end where I look at the main claimants and it's like top trumps. I sort of give them a rating and their likelihood to succeed.
Since our last podcast, which was over a year ago now, have
Wow.
have you got a new history pet peeve?
Ah, I'm hoping I didn't say this last time, but I think probably I've got to. Can I have two in case I've said one before? I think I'm going to sneak in. The one that immediately springs to mind is that Elizabeth didn't think anything about her mother. And, it's always said Elizabeth was a real daddy's girl because she always talks about Henry VIII. Nonsense. And that's not just to plug my book, Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I. But, Elizabeth was a great politician. She knew she had to talk about Henry VIII because nobody's going to question his right to the throne, whereas Anne Boleyn was quite a scandalous figure. But when you look again at Elizabeth's actions, not her words, you see how she revered her late mother and surrounded herself with Boleyns. I think the other pet peeve is that Anne of Cleves is the ugly wife. I don't think she was ugly at all. I think it was a disastrous first meeting with Henry VIII that really doomed their marriage to failure. But I think Holbein was true to his subjects and he was true to Anne of Cleves. And if we're going to talk about anybody who wasn't an oil painting, perhaps we should be focusing on Henry VIII.
No, absolutely. I'm fed up of seeing Anne of Cleves was a minger. It's not
Yes,
true.
it's not true.
If you could invite any historical figure to a dinner party, who would it be and why?
These are such great questions. You see, my first instinct was Elizabeth, but I actually don't think I would because I would be terrified. Because much as I love her and admire her, I think she was pretty scary. And I don't think it would be a very relaxing dinner party with her there in case you said the wrong thing. I think, and I'm not sure what you're going to make of this, Jess, because I can see all your Anne Boleyn memorabilia in the background, but I think Thomas Cromwell. I would like to ask him some questions. And I would particularly like to ask about his role in the downfall of Anne Boleyn and quite how much of that downfall was due to him, how much was due to Henry. And as well, I think he would just be great fun because Cromwell had a fantastic sense of humor. He even made his enemies laugh. And he spent lavishly on entertaining people. So actually, maybe I should go to his dinner party because it'd probably be better, the one that I threw. But I think Cromwell. I think you'd have an entertaining evening sitting next to Thomas Cromwell.
No, I think that's a very good answer. I'll ignore, the Anne Boleyn memorabilia. It's all like in my background. If you could be friends with any Tudor queen, who would it be and why?
So, for the same reason that I'm not inviting Elizabeth to my dinner party, I'm not going to pretend that I could ever be her friend because, I know my place. So, in fact, it would be a Tudor queen I just mentioned, and it would be Anne of Cleves. I adore Anne of Cleves. I think she was history's winner. She certainly was the most successful of the six wives, outliving all the rest, certainly outliving Henry. She was pragmatic. She gave Henry what he wanted. He wanted out of the marriage, so she quickly agreed to an annulment, was rewarded with 5 palaces, £20,000 a year, and royal status as the king's sister. And then she just lived this great life. And what I really love about Anne is that nobody has a bad word to say about her. She just seems this thoroughly nice woman and she gets on with everybody, which is pretty difficult in the Tudor court to get on with Catholics and Protestants. Yet she does get on with both of her stepdaughters, Mary and Elizabeth, and of course, Edward. And you get a sense she's just living her best life once she's got Henry out the picture. So I feel I could have been friends with Anne of Cleves.
No, I think I would. I mean, I love Anne Boleyn, but I think I'd be scared to be her friend.
Yes, exactly. In the same way, I'd be scared to be friends with her daughter Elizabeth. Yeah.
I think my listeners would kill me if I didn't ask this question. Have you got any more writing projects coming up?
I have, and I really, really hope you'll be happy about it. Well,
Oh,
I think you will, because I can't reveal exactly what it is, but suffice to say, it's a novel and it's out next year. I've just finished it, and it's about somebody from Tudor history who is quite close to your heart. So, so you'll just have to have me back next year, Jess.
oh, always come back on the podcast.
I'd love to.
Thank you so much for coming back on today and discussing your fabulous new book.
It's such a pleasure. It's lovely to chat with you again, and I do hope your listeners enjoy.
Thank you for listening to Her Story. If there's a historical woman who inspires you and you'd like to share her story on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch at unholytudor@gmail.com. Until next time, keep celebrating the incredible women who've shaped our world.